Welcome to Building My Legacy podcast. This podcast is designed for leaders and entrepreneurs who want to leave a legacy and will provide strategies that focus upon key elements for legacy creation, determining your desired impact and its benefit, increasing your legacy's reach by engaging key stakeholders, planning, prioritizing, and executing. Here's your host, Dr. Lois Sonstegard.
Hi, everybody. This is Lois Sonstegard. I'm here with Sally Helgesen this morning. I am so pleased to bring Sally to you because she has spoken just volumes to me in the book that she has written about women in leadership and some of the barriers that women experience in their leadership role. So I just want to tell you a little bit about Sally. Sally has written many books, but the book that has just spoken to me so much is her most recent book, which is How Women Rise and the barriers that women put in their lives to prevent them from rising, from getting that promotion, from getting the raise. And she has done some marvelous research that she is eager to share with us today. She's also written some other books that I wanted you to become aware of. One is The Female Vision, Women's Real Power at Work, The Female Advantage, Women's Ways of Leadership, The Web of Inclusion, a New Architecture for Building Great Organizations. So I don't think there's anybody more capable of speaking on this. She speaks to corporate groups all over the world about the role of women in corporations. And so, Sally, I just would like you to share with us a little bit this morning. How did you get into this business?
How did I get into this business? Good morning, Lois. Good to be with you. I was in the 1980s working in corporate communications, had a number of jobs that were good and interesting jobs. But it was very clear to me that the companies that I worked for, no matter how good they were, did not really have a clue as to how to value the talents and contributions of the women within them. Women were just really starting to come in to the workforce in significant numbers and just beginning to achieve any kind of role of authority or influence. But the companies did not know what to do with them. And I felt like I heard some of the best ideas, even big strategic ideas, when I was in the ladies' lounge back in that day. The bathrooms all had these lounges, and I kept thinking, this needs to filter up. And it's partly that we don't really appreciate, the companies don't know how to appreciate it. And at the same time, I was trying to prepare myself to be, to some degree, successful by reading a lot of the books that were being published then. There were a lot of books about, women being successful. But all of them, every single one of them, emphasized what women... none of them saw that women could make a real contribution. It was just sort of, don't do this, don't do that. And women didn't understand teamwork because we hadn't played football, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought, well, we're really getting bad advice. We're getting advice that we have to completely adapt to what we find. And people don't really know how to value our skills anyway. So I decided to write a book studying how the best women leaders do things. And that book, The Female Advantage, really became very successful. I think because it was the first book. It was the first book that looked at what women had to contribute rather than how they needed to change and adapt. And people started calling me for advice. There was nothing else like that out there, inviting me to speak at their forums. And I thought, well, this is more interesting than working in the corporate communications jobs I have. Much more insecure, but I think I'm going to go with this. So that's almost 30 years ago. Excuse me.
Well, Sally, we're thrilled that you took that course because your advice, your insights, I think, are just incredible. So let's start with, you talk about some of the beliefs that...
Sorry, I'm just getting over a cold. Yeah.
No problem. You talk about some of the beliefs that limit women And one of those in particular that resonated with me was ambition is not a good thing. You want to speak about some of those beliefs that are behind the roadblocks? We try to change behavior, but you talk about we can't change behavior until we know our beliefs.
That's exactly true. Yeah, we can't. We need to really analyze. And in the new book, How Women Rise, which is about behaviors that are most likely to get in the way of successful women, what we seek to do, my co-author Marshall Goldsmith and I, is to identify what are the behaviors most likely to hold women back as they seek to rise to a higher level. And in doing that, we're not doing that because we're saying the reason women haven't reached the highest level in a lot of cases is because of their own behavior. We recognize there are lots of structural and cultural issues and old boys network, but we wanted to really focus on what women could control, and that is your habits and behaviors and what could get in your way. And the more you dig down into that, the more you find that certain beliefs, overarching beliefs, are really a key to causing these behaviors. There's a belief, as you say, that we can't be too ambitious, or that being ambitious is not a good thing. It's not a good thing for us. It's not a good thing for the world. And because if we take that seriously, then what happens is if somebody in their own self-interest often says, well, you seem pretty ambitious, then we'll back off like, oh, Lord, no, I'm not ambitious. Please don't think
negative.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we allow ourselves to some extent to be manipulated by our fear of being seen as ambitious. Another underlying belief is that I need to make everyone happy. And that's part of my job here, is to make sure everybody's happy, everybody feels great about themselves, et cetera, et cetera. That's a wonderful thing. But especially as you move to a higher level, it's going to get in your way, because the commitment to make sure everyone feels good, you're going to have a tough time holding people accountable. You're going to have a tough time enforcing your own boundaries because you're so actively trying to please. So that's another belief system, sort of an automatic assumption and belief that we make. And these are rooted in good things. So it's not as if we want to try to become a different kind of person, but we want to recognize how these beliefs could get in our way. And there's one other fundamental belief that I think informs quite a few of the behaviors that we examine in the book. And that is a kind of either or approach. Either I do things perfectly or I completely messed it up. Either I become obnoxious and constantly talking about how great I am and claiming my achievements, or I just sit back quietly and hope that people notice what I contribute. There's a lot of sort of either or thinking. Either I become an expert and a master in the work I'm doing and invest everything in my present job, or I'm not really giving my all to my team and my organization. So I become more aware since the book came out last April, and I've been doing tons of programs, workshops, and leadership programs around it, of how these underlying mindsets really do shape some of the behaviors.
It's so powerful, and we don't really think about what is the belief system that's impacting the choices I'm making, right?
Yes.
And is it a false one, or is it real?
Yeah.
It
feels real.
It does feel real, and part of it's the way we're brought up. And what's interesting, Sally, as I read your book, is I have two children, a boy and a girl, okay, both in corporate lives, and both approach their careers very differently. Mm-hmm. And after reading your book, I realized my son follows this male from the day he begins a job. He lets them know where he's going next.
Exactly.
My daughter, on the other hand, works very hard at pleasing. so that she's recognized and can move on. So let's talk a little bit about what some of the roadblocks are.
Yeah. Well, one of the behaviors, I've been doing a lot of workshops and a lot of programs. And one of the behaviors that seems to get the most endorsement, or where, people are raising their hands and saying, oh boy, that's me, is these almost twin behaviors of reluctance to claim your achievements, which is often inhibited because of feeling like I don't want people to think, I'm this, I'm that, I'm ambitious, I don't want to be all about me, etc. And then it's twin, it's evil twin, which is expecting others to spontaneously notice and value your contributions. Women seem to really resonate with that, and that is feeling that I don't need to bring attention to what I'm doing. If I do a great job, people should notice. The problem with that is that people often don't, especially in today's environment. People are so busy and they're not necessarily noticing what you're contributing. And, part of it is a reluctance. I mean, often when I ask women who say that they're really bad at this, I said, well, why? And one thing I'll often hear is, well, if I have to act like that jerk down the hall to get noticed around here, no, thank you. Well, that's the either or framework, you see. Either I'm the most obnoxious jerk in this organization, or I just sit back and wait. The real problem with sitting back and waiting, in addition to the fact that it's often not very effective, is that as you are not noticed and not recognized, you start to feel bad and you start to get discouraged, and you start to really lose your feeling of engagement and commitment in the organization. And that's so problematical. So you can end up thinking, and I hear women say this all the time, well, my boss doesn't have any idea of what I'm contributing. I guess I don't belong here. So it's one of those factors that can be very discouraging for women. So it's very important to address it. First of all, if you don't get comfortable representing your achievements, if you don't find a way to do that, a way to talk about what you do that doesn't sound like, that works for you, then it's not going to position you well to move on. And it is going to potentially negatively impact how you approach your job and how you feel about yourself.
It's almost a system you have to proactively plan for and then practice it. So you do it. So you hear yourself saying, promoting yourself in a sense, but hear yourself so you know how to reframe it and reframe it so you're comfortable that that's really who you are, and yet the message gets across.
That's correct. And a good way to do that, and I think one of the reasons a book is gaining a lot of attention and being successful is we don't just diagnose these things. We also offer ways to address them. And a good way to do that, so you feel like, I don't really see a way of doing this, then you start asking people, you start enlisting people, you're going into, you say, I really feel like I don't get noticed or acknowledged. Just, you can say to a colleague in that meeting, you'll be in there with me. Would you kind of watch and see, is there a place you think that I could speak up? I'm going to try speaking up and talking about something I achieved and being clear about that. Could you see how you think it lands, and have, any thoughts you have that you could share with me would be helpful? Or you can go to somebody who you think is really good at that and say, I noticed that you're very, very, you seem very skilled at representing what your achievements are, but in a way that's appropriate and likable, and doesn't seem like all about, like it's all about me. Do you have any tips for me in terms of how you frame that, that could help me be more comfortable finding a style to do that. And enlisting other people in your own self-development like that is really, really powerful. It gives you support. It gives you visibility while you're doing it. People begin to notice that you're changing. And, again, these are, very powerful small actions and tweaks that you can make if you identify how some of these behaviors may be getting in your way.
So you have to be self-aware, don't you? You've got to be able to see that that's what you're doing, and then to be able to enlist that help. And so,
it's an interesting thing that you say, because the self-awareness piece, it's very hard to be aware of habits that are ingrained, which is why we advocate enlisting other people. We can be aware that something is getting in our way in a sort of over abstract sense. But when we're in a situation where we would benefit by practicing a different way of behaving, it's really hard not to revert to old behavior. And that's why it's helpful to engage other people in the process. If you're in a meeting and the way you usually present is a certain way, and you're trying to approach it differently, then having another person watching you is a little bit of a trigger and a reminder, because otherwise we can just, with all the good intentions in the world, default to what is familiar.
It's so true. My goodness, that's so true. Let's go on and talk about one of the other roadblocks that you mentioned in your book. And one of the ones that resonated so much with me, because I see it over and over and over again when I talk with women, and that's ruminating. Yeah. Just ruminating over events or conversations or looks or nods or lack thereof.
Yeah, that, it's really interesting. There was a lot of rumination, a lot of study on rumination that was done at Yale some years ago. And the studies show that rumination, and that is, what does rumination mean? You think of ruminants, a cow is a ruminant, a sheep is a ruminant. They're animals that chew and chew and chew and re-chew their food in order to get it processed through their stomach. So it's a really great word because it's a great image. It means you're constantly chewing something over rather than, letting it go, letting it pass. And they find that researchers find rumination is much more common in women than men. Two people will leave a meeting and the guy will go out and say, well, it was fine. And we'll say, oh, I don't know. I don't necessarily, I felt like the way that we presented wasn't picked up on in the way that, it should have been. And there were some people in the room who were clearly not paying attention. And I noticed so-and-so was very disengaged when we were presenting about so-and-so. So there are a couple things going on here. And then she'll sit with that, stew with that. Were they disinterested? Maybe, what do they think of? What do they think of our team? What do they think of me? They'll take that to heart and run with it. And a couple things are going on there. And one is that I believe in the female vision. I was looking at why women don't get more credit for being visionaries or big picture thinkers. Because, research.
Huge.
What?
Huge topic.
Yeah, I wrote a whole book on it. But because research shows that that senior executives tend to see women as having many, many strengths, but to be skeptical about their capacity for vision or big picture, long-term thinking. And I thought, well, why is that? Women, in my experience, have that a lot. Anyway, the fundamental, so what we looked at was, are there differences in men and women, how men and women see things? And the answer is yes. And it starts with notice. You think of vision, there are three parts to it. There's what you notice, what you value about what you notice, and then how you tell a story about why it's important. But it starts with what you notice. And you can see that by that example I just gave, women are noticing a lot of things that are going on at once. And men tend to have a much more laser-like focus. And, well, no, we made the presentation and the numbers added up and that's the story. Whereas women will go into the room and they're noticing everybody's response. Well, that's a great gift. That's very powerful. Having that very active kind of radar where you're reading a lot of information in the room is a great gift. However, it has a shadow side. And the shadow side is you can get caught on overreading and over-responding to all the reactions that you see. And if you pick up on reactions that you feel are potentially negative, that can serve. So your radar can really, an undisciplined radar can serve rumination. And the problem with rumination is you just keep going over and over things. And people who ruminate tend to believe that by going over and over and over things, it will give them more skills and more tools for solving the problems. But it really doesn't. What it does is it tends to paralyze you and to make you feel bad, and actually can lead to depression.
I found that fascinating. You know, one of the pieces of research that triggered with me when I read that in your book comes out of Gallup. And they're talking about right now where 80% of the workforce are feeling overwhelmed and stressed. Yes. And 21% of the corporations in America today are saying that it has hit critical levels and they don't know what to do with that. Right. Or they don't have systems in place to do with that. And part of that comes from just exactly what you're talking about. Because if you have all this out there that you're trying to solve, right, and you don't know when to shut it off, you're going to move into overwhelm pretty fast and depression, because those two things were tied with them as well in their research.
You know, it's really interesting in the female vision. One of the other things that we found, and it's partly because of this radar, is that there's some differences in men and women in terms of motivation and stress. Men require more support to get motivated. But once they're motivated, you know, so they have a lower start point. But once they're motivated, they can stay with it. Women require much less, much less outside support to get motivated. They tend to get enthusiastic right from the get-go, but this sets their activity point higher, so they're more likely to tip into stress earlier. And what is fascinating to me, and I think kind of a result of our industrial heritage, where our organizations were basically built for men, is that organizations spend a lot of time and resources on motivating people and very few with helping them deal with stress. And I think that research such as you quote from Gallup, which is having a big impact on organizations, really will begin to shift that balance so that organizations recognize dealing with stress is something that's key for utilizing the workforce in the best way.
Sally, I want to move on because I don't want to leave our audience without talking about things that they can do. So what can they do? And one of the stories that you talked about in your book that just fascinated me, and I'm going to use it for my own self, and I'm going to teach it to everybody I can because I think it's so brilliant, is your elevator pitch.
Yeah. Well, and this has to do with the earlier behaviors we talked about in terms of claiming your achievements, in terms of not expecting others to spontaneously notice and value what you do, and a couple other behaviors in the book that, such as putting your job before your career rather than thinking of your whole career and how every job fits into it, just trying to focus on the job. What really helps with all of those things is to have as much clarity as possible about what you are trying to achieve in your job, the job you have right now, what you are trying to achieve in your career overall, what is important to you to achieve. And you can do it either focusing on the job you have now. You can do it in terms of your larger career, but having a very, very clear purpose as to what you're trying to achieve, and then articulating that at every opportunity so that people know where you stand and they know how to measure what you're trying, your level of success is really, really important. So when I do workshops, I've developed, and I really got this from, I was doing a program at the World Bank, and the chief sponsor for the Women's Initiatives, who was a gentleman from China, was there. He was a really interesting guy. And he was saying that in his experience, what he noticed was that when he was at headquarters in New York, or I guess they're in Geneva, that when younger women were asked, well, what do you do? They would repeat their job title. When younger men were asked, and this is by somebody in real authority, what do you do? I contribute to, creating a telecom platform in developing markets. And my hope is to do that in Africa and Asia because I have X, Y, and Z connections. So they'd be very, very clear about what their purpose was in doing their job rather than just repeating their job title. And this man, I think his name was Dong Soon, was saying that it was something he thought was really important for women to just develop that ease and facility with whenever you're asked, particularly by someone in authority, when we call it an elevator thing because it'd be you find yourself in the elevator with the CEO or somebody on the executive committee of your organization, or a potential customer or client if you're an entrepreneur in a small company, that you have something to say about what you're doing that also encompasses why you're doing it and what you want as the outcome. So you're very, very clear in that. And I thought it was just a great suggestion. And he said, it's simply a matter of preparation. You really think through, what is it? How does this job, in marketing at this, television station or communications company, how does this fit into my larger scheme of what I want to contribute and where I want this to take me? And then you really are work on articulating that so you're ready and people know what you're trying to do, where you're trying to go. And he said he's seen it work wonders. He said he saw a young man get in the elevator with his CEO at the World Bank. He rattled off what he wanted, and the CEO said, call this number, I've got an opportunity for you, because he knew. And he said, if he'd just gotten in and the CEO had said, what do you do? And he said, well, I'm a junior VP of whatever, nothing would have happened. There's nothing you can do with that information. So in my workshops, I work very hard with women to develop a kind of, we can call it an elevator speech, a mission statement, something that really expresses where they want to go. And guess what? It's part of the reason this is so powerful is it's helpful to think this through yourself. You really need to do this for yourself. Yeah.
It gets rid of the clutter, doesn't it? And I looked at, you offer up in your book what your elevator speech is, and Marshall's elevator speech, which is so simple, so clear. I help successful executives become more successful and change lives. I mean, it's a little bit of a truncation on my part, but that's basically what he does. And it's so easy to understand that, right?
It's easy to understand that. My mission, and it's been the same for 30 years, is I help women to recognize, articulate, and act on their greatest strengths. That's my mission. That's it. So once you have that, and then it also gives you something that you can make decisions about what opportunities would be useful to accept because you know where you're going. So it's really clarifying and helpful. You want to be as concise and clear as possible.
Sally, it's one of the things that struck me as you said that is, you look at all of the 12 roadblocks, and part of those 12 roadblocks, really also underlying all of it, is not knowing who you are, what your skill set is, and comfortable with it, owning it, so you can express it. Because I know for me, for a long time, it was, I had a vision of what success was, and I kept trying to be what that was rather than owning what my own real success and strengths were.
Yeah. It takes, in my experience, women get there, and they get there in a very powerful way, but it takes a longer time. It takes a much longer time traditionally. And part of my goal in life is to shorten that process for women.
That is so wonderful. Sally, you are a marvelous, marvelous person and inspiration to all of us. I just thank you so much. Before we go, though, I want you to conclude with one of the things that you write about in your book and is so important with Marshall Goldsmith, who is probably one of the foremost coaches in the world, executive coaches. And he talks about saying thank you. You want to say something about that?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it works very well in the context of our book. We have a model for engaging other people in your development. I talked a little bit about it earlier. I'm going into this meeting. I've had a problem with, say, being concise. Excuse me. I've had a problem with being concise. Would you listen and give me your thoughts and give me your opinions afterwards? And that would be really helpful. So we've got a model for doing that. And the last step in it is whatever anybody says, whether it's helpful or whether it's not, just say thank you. Don't say, well, I don't think that would work for me, or I'm not quite comfortable doing that because, or whatever. You have asked someone for advice. They have given you advice. And your role is to say thank you and not to comment on it. This is one of Marshall's big things. He is, as you point out, he's been ranked for the last 9 years, the #1 executive coach in the world. He fines his people when they don't say thank you. He makes them pay him, and then he gives it to charity. When they don't say thank you enough. And, this is one of the great things. Marshall's very big on saying thank you, but this is one of the things that women tend to be more proactive about and more comfortable with, and is more of an ingrained behavior than certainly a lot of senior male executives who sometimes have problems saying thank you. It indicates a vulnerability. Most of us are comfortable saying thank you, so we really need to realize the benefits of spreading that expression of gratitude, especially when we're asking people to be engaged in our own development and helping us to adapt behaviors that are more effective and serve us better.
Sally, our time is almost over. I'm very sad for that. Any comment or bits of wisdom you would like to pass on before we finish?
Yeah, the rumination piece you brought up, I want to say, I think that one of the reasons I was able to write this book, partly is that many of these behaviors were really clear to me from the workshops that I've been giving for at least the last 10 years on finding what your vision was, but also because I exemplify a lot of the behaviors, and rumination has certainly been one. So I'll finish with just a little quick story that's got a resolution of a to-do action. Marshall and I were working and at his apartment on the book, talking it through, and he got a message from his home office, and he picked it up, where we don't talk on the phone when we're working together, picked it up, and I heard him, and he was saying, oh, yeah, I was supposed to call him at 2, Dr. Kim. Oh, okay. Well, I'll have to call him back. And he put the phone down and he said, oh, well. And I thought, I knew who Dr. Kim was, and he was the CEO of one of the world's largest corporate and most important corporate entities. And I was just so struck by him saying, "Oh, well," and then moving on. And I was thinking, whoa, because I was very in the book. So I was thinking, I would have beaten myself up for 6 weeks if I'd forgotten to call a call like that. It really would have been very painful to me. And it just struck me, his reaction. So when I went home, I sat down at my computer and I printed out in the largest font possible a huge sign that says, "Oh, well." And whenever I get tempted to sort of go down the rabbit hole of self-regret because I've made a mistake, because I'm a human being and I'm not perfect, that banner is really, really helpful to me. I could show it to you if I were in my office, but I'm in my husband's office because our house is being cleaned today. But it hangs very proudly on my office wall, just saying, "Oh, well." And I am reminded, let go. I'm not perfect. I'm not aspiring to be perfect. I am aspiring to give the greatest contribution I can in the way that I've identified is important for me. And perfectionism and that desire to be perfect is not going to serve that.
That's such a great lesson for all of us. We get caught up on so much, don't we? And perfectionism certainly is, of professional women, I think in particular, a very difficult one to give up. I think it is for certain professions as well, whether you're male or female, that their jobs require perfectionism in a sense.
All right.
Sally, thank you so much. Those of you who are on this webinar, I just want to let you know, if we have your email, we will be sending you Sally's ebook, How Women Rise. It's my gift to all of you. Just enjoyed that we could share this with you. So know that it's coming. If we don't have your email, make sure that we have it so we can get that to you. And that's for those of you who are present on this webinar today. Sally, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You are just so wonderful. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. You too.
You've been listening to Building My Legacy podcast with Dr. Lois Sonstagard. To book your appointment with Dr. Sonstagard, visit www.buildtomorrow.com.